Picture this. It's Mike Lowrey's wedding day. He's standing at the altar in a sharp suit, the Miami Sun doing what Miami Sun does, making everything look like it belongs on a magazine cover. His best friend and partner, Marcus Burnett, is right there beside him. 30 years of bullets, bad guys, and barely surviving everything the city could throw at them. And now, right now, they've made it to a wedding. A moment of actual peace. And then Marcus collapses. Heart attack. Right there on the dance floor. The party hasn't even really started. Mike is in his wedding clothes. His best man is on the ground. And once again, the universe has reminded these two men that peace is not really in the cards for them. That's Bad Boys, ride or die. That's the whole thesis in one opening image. These guys can't catch a break, but they'll keep showing up for each other anyway. Every single time. Here's the thing about the Bad Boys franchise. It's one of those rare action series that started as a specific product of its era and somehow, across 30 years and 4 movies, evolved into something genuinely emotional, something that actually earned its longevity rather than just coasting on it. When the original Bad Boys dropped in 1995, it wasn't supposed to be a cultural institution. It was Michael Bay's first feature, a Sony Pictures action movie built around 2 stars whose chemistry nobody had really tested together before. Will Smith, fresh off The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and riding high on the Bad Boys trailer itself, and Martin Lawrence, who was absolutely killing it on the stand-up circuit and on his own hit TV show. Nobody had a clue these two would click the way they did, but they did, instantly, effortlessly, like they'd been doing this for years. The '95 original was pure product of its moment. Kinetic, loud, stylized to within an inch of its life, with Bay doing what Bay does, making every frame look like a cologne advertisement interrupted by an explosion. It worked. The film grossed over $140 million worldwide on a $19 million budget, which is the kind of math that makes studio executives weep with joy. More importantly, it made 2 movie stars out of 2 TV stars, and audiences fell hard for the pairing. Then came the sequel, Bad Boys 2, in 2003. And look, if you want to understand what Michael Bay actually meant when he said he made it bigger, just watch that film. Double the budget, double the chaos, a third-act invasion of Cuba, and action sequences so maximalist they practically required a disclaimer. Critics were mixed. Audiences? They showed up. 273 million worldwide. And yet, despite the spectacle, or maybe because of so much spectacle, the characters felt a little lost in the machinery. Mike and Marcus were still magnetic together, but the film was more interested in how many cars it could flip than in what these two men actually meant to each other. And then, nothing. 17 years passed. Will Smith had become one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, and then had a complicated relationship with that status. Martin Lawrence had stepped away from the spotlight considerably. The franchise sat dormant, existing mainly as a reference point. You know, Bad Boys? In conversations about 90s action movies. For a while, it genuinely seemed like Mike and Marcus were done. Then 2020 happened. Bad Boys for Life hit theaters in January, which felt risky. January not exactly being a prestige month, and quietly did something remarkable. Adil El Arbi and Bilal Fallah, the Belgian-Moroccan directing duo known as Adil and Bilal, took over from Bay and did the thing nobody expected. They slowed down. Not in a boring way, in a human way. They gave Mike and Marcus actual weight. Mike discovered he had a son, Armando, born from a secret relationship with a cartel assassin. Marcus faced his mortality. The action was still kinetic and crowd-pleasing, but for the first time in the franchise, you could feel what was actually at stake for these two people, not just these 2 cops. Bad Boys for Life made $206 million domestically and $426 million worldwide in January, coming out of nowhere. It became the highest-grossing January release in Hollywood history at the time. Critics liked it, audiences loved it, and suddenly this franchise that had been sleeping for 17 years was very much alive, and Adil and Bilal were exactly the right people to carry it forward. Which brings us to 2024. Bad Boys, ride or die. Now, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, because ignoring it would be dishonest and also, frankly, a little cowardly. The film exists in a specific context that its makers couldn't control and that its audience couldn't ignore. Will Smith, March 27, 2020. The whole world watched it happen, and the conversation around it didn't stop for a long time. Within days, the Academy handed Smith a 10-year ban from its ceremonies. His planned projects were put on hold, shuffled, quietly delayed. The industry paused, watching to see what happened next. What would happen with one of the most bankable, beloved, decorated actors of his generation after an incident that went globally viral for all the wrong reasons? Bad Boys, ride or die was the answer. His first major theatrical release in the aftermath. And the question hanging over it, unspoken but absolutely present in every review, every opening weekend hot take, every audience survey, would people show up? They showed up. 193.5 million domestic, 404 million worldwide, a cinema score of A, and a Rotten Tomatoes audience score, brace yourself, of 97%. 97%. The critics were more measured, landing the film at 65% on the tomatometer, but the audience critic divide tells you something genuinely interesting about what this film represented and who it was made for. The critical hesitation is understandable. On a purely objective level, Ride or Die isn't reinventing cinema. It's not asking big philosophical questions about the nature of justice or the corruption of systems. Not really. It's a buddy cop action comedy with a fugitive plot, high-octane set pieces, and two movie stars in their late 50s doing what they've been doing together since Bill Clinton was in the White House. But the audience response? That 97%? That's not just nostalgia. That's something more specific. It's the audience saying, we wanted to see Will Smith back on screen doing Will Smith things, and we're glad he is. It's the franchise community saying, Mike and Marcus are ours and we've been waiting. It's the collective acknowledgement that sometimes what you want from a movie isn't a masterwork. It's exactly what it says it is, delivered with full commitment and genuine heart. And Ride or Die has genuine heart. That's the part that could get lost in the discourse around its context, and it deserves better than that. So here's where we're going in this essay. We're going to break down everything that makes Bad Boys Ride or Die work. And work it does on its own terms, which are the only terms that actually matter. We're going to look at the fugitive narrative and what it gets right structurally, and what it borrows from the franchise playbook versus what it genuinely adds. We're going to spend real time with Mike and Marcus as characters, specifically the way this film does something the franchise has never done before, which is flip their dynamic completely. Because here's a hint, the guy who used to be afraid of everything suddenly can't be scared at all, and the guy who was always fearless is having panic attack. That is genuinely original territory for this franchise, and it pays off. We're going to look at how Adil and Bilal and their cinematographer Robrecht Havard made very specific visual and aesthetic choices, a camera that never quite settles, that moves the way a fugitive moves, and how those choices create an atmosphere of kinetic pressure that matches the story perfectly. We'll get into the action sequences themselves, because several of them are impressively constructed, and the helicopter crash set piece in particular deserves its own dedicated appreciation. We're going to talk about what this film is actually about underneath the car chases and the one-liners. Loyalty past death, the philosophy of ride or die, taken to its literal extreme. What two men who've been through everything together actually mean to one another when the whole system turns against them. And yes, we're going to keep coming back to that 97% audience score, what it says about franchise filmmaking, and what Bad Boys Ride or Die understands about its audience that a lot of bigger budget sequels miss entirely. Marcus Burnett is flatlined on a dance floor while his best friend stands over him in a wedding suit. The movie's barely begun, and it's already told you exactly what kind of film it is. One where chaos interrupts joy but never actually destroys it, where the stakes are real but the friendship is realer, where two men who probably should have retired a decade ago keep choosing each other over the easier road. Ride or Die. It's not just a title. By the end of this film, you'll understand it's a whole philosophy. Let's get into it. The wedding sequence opens with the kind of controlled chaos that immediately tells you Adil and Bilal understand these characters on a molecular level. Mike Lowrey, the man who has survived drug lords, assassins, cartel hit squads, and his own son trying to kill him, is getting married, and he's nervous. Not the panicked, sweating kind of nervous, the still, quiet kind, the kind that sits behind the eyes. Christine, Melanie Liebert, is radiant. The setting is perfect. Everything that should be right is right. And yet, in the middle of his own vows, Mike has a panic attack. This is the single most important character beat in the entire first act, and the film drops it almost casually, as if it's just flavor. It isn't. Mike Lowrey having a panic attack at his own wedding is the story's first major piece of new information about who this man has become. The guy who has always been pure nerve and adrenaline, whose recklessness was practically a personality trait, is now someone who freezes up. Something has shifted in him, internally, and the film is smart enough not to over-explain it in the moment. It just shows it and moves on, trusting you to file it away. Then Marcus collapses. Mid-reception. Just down. No dramatic build-up, no warning music swell. He's there, he's celebrating, and then he's on the ground, clutching his chest. Heart attack. And everything stops. The scenes that follow in the hospital are where Ride or Die quietly does some of its best work. While Marcus is between worlds, technically alive, but not quite here, he has a vision. And the person waiting for him in that vision isn't his wife or his kids or anyone you'd necessarily expect. It's Captain Howard. Joe Pantoliano's Howard was killed in Bad Boys for Life, shot by Armando before Armando's redemption arc flipped the whole film on its head. His death hit hard because Pantoliano had been playing this character across 3 movies in 2 decades, and Howard wasn't just comic relief. He was the emotional anchor of the AMMO unit, the guy who yelled at Mike and Marcus because he actually cared about them coming home. Losing him in the 3rd film was a genuine gut punch. So when he shows up in Marcus's coma dream, it isn't just fan service. It's the film processing grief through the language of the supernatural. And it works because Pantoliano plays the scene with such specific, Howard-esque energy. Half exasperated, half tender, entirely himself. He doesn't comfort Marcus with platitudes. He argues with him. He tells him it isn't his time. He sends him back. But here's the thing Marcus takes away from that experience. He believes, genuinely, completely, with total conviction, that God has made him bulletproof, that he has been told, by an angel essentially, that nothing can kill him now. He wakes up from that coma not shaken or sobered, but liberated, fearless in a way he has never been in 3 prior movies. And from this moment forward, the dynamic between him and Mike is fundamentally, irreversibly different. The scaredy cat is gone. In his place is a man who will walk into a gunfight with a smile. Meanwhile, and the film cuts between these 2 threads with real efficiency. The conspiracy is assembling itself. Captain Howard, it turns out, isn't just dead, he's been framed. Someone has dug up a financial paper trail, apparently connecting Howard to the very cartel operations AMMO spent years dismantling. The implication being, Howard was dirty, a corrupt cop who helped the cartel and was executed by his own men when things went sideways. It's a vicious, specific kind of lie. Not just this person did a bad thing, but this person you trusted and grieved was never who you thought he was. And the people behind it have done the work. The evidence looks real. The digital trail looks real. The narrative is airtight, at least on the surface, and the people in power are running with it. The man pulling the strings is James McGrath, played with cold, calculating efficiency by Eric Dane. McGrath is not a screaming villain. He doesn't monologue. He's the kind of antagonist who operates through institutions, through chain of command, through bureaucratic leverage, through the simple fact that he has power and access and knows exactly how to weaponize both. He's a law enforcement official who is himself deeply embedded with cartel money, and framing a dead captain for exactly what he's been doing is both tactically brilliant and morally disgusting in equal measure. What McGrath needs, beyond the dead man's reputation, is a fall guy who's still alive, someone whose credibility can be systematically destroyed. Someone close enough to Howard that their contamination makes the story about Howard more believable. He chooses Mike Lowrey. The evidence that surfaces against Mike is damning in the way that manufactured evidence always is. Not because it withstands scrutiny, but because it doesn't need to. By the time anybody starts scrutinizing, the narrative has already taken hold. Mike is presented as Howard's co-conspirator. The money trail connects them. And now suddenly, the man who has been the most aggressive, most reckless, most rule-bending cop in Miami's history, who has shot people, blown things up, acted unilaterally more times than anyone can count, looks a lot more guilty than he should, because his actual record makes it easier to believe the fabricated one. The MMO team fractures almost immediately, and this is one of the more interesting structural choices the film makes, because not everyone abandons Mike and Marcus. The team splinters. Some go with the official story, some quietly believe in their people. Dorn Alexander Ludwig and Kelly Vanessa Hudgens are put in an impossible position, caught between institutional loyalty and personal loyalty, between what they're being told and what they know in their gut. This creates a texture that the first 2 Bay films never had, where the question of who can you trust inside the department makes the threat feel more genuine, more invasive than just an external enemy you can shoot at. There's a specific scene where Mike realizes the walls are closing in. Not in a dramatic action sequence way, but in a slow, procedural way. And the look on Will Smith's face is something worth paying close attention to. It isn't anger first, it's disbelief. The system he has given everything to, bent every rule for, bled for, is now turning on him using his own record as the weapon. That disbelief shading quickly into cold determination is one of the more quietly effective performance moments in the entire film. And then there's Armando, Jacob Scipio's Armando, Mike's biological son, introduced in the previous film as a cartel assassin who becomes an ally, is now in federal custody, effectively a ghost. He exists in a legal gray zone, where his cooperation in Bad Boys for Life bought him some protection but not freedom, and he's been sitting in a black site, waiting for a resolution that the system has no real interest in providing. The conspiracy changes his calculus completely. When it becomes clear that Mike is being framed and that the institutional channels are compromised, Armando's value shifts. He has cartel connections. He knows people and places that don't appear in any official database. He is, essentially, Mike's one viable off-the-grid resource. And Mike, who is still in the process of figuring out what kind of father he wants to be to a son he didn't know existed until a year ago, has to decide how much of that relationship he's willing to activate. This is the human engine under the plot mechanics, and the film knows it. The Armando thread isn't just a convenient action resource. It's a test of what ride or die actually means in practice. Does it extend to blood you only recently discovered? Does loyalty get inherited? When everything else falls apart, who do you actually call? The act ends with the line crossed, fully, irreversibly. Mike and Marcus are fugitive. They haven't surrendered. They haven't trusted the process. Instead, they've made the choice that defines the entire film going forward. They are going to clear Howard's name themselves, from the outside, on the run, with whatever resources they can scrape together and whoever is still willing to stand with them. It's not a rational decision, running from law enforcement when you are law enforcement, when your entire adult life has been built on the infrastructure of the badge. There's something almost absurd about it. The film leans into that absurdity playfully without ever letting it undercut the genuine stakes, because Howard is dead, and somebody is dragging his name through the mud for their own protection. And Mike and Marcus decide, without much deliberation at all, that this is not something they can let stand. Not because they've calculated the odds or because they have a bulletproof plan, but because of the exact thing this franchise has always been about. Underneath all the explosions and the banter, when your person needs you, you show up. Dead or alive, in custody or out, against impossible odds, you show up. The wedding was the beginning of the story. The coma was the hinge. And now, with badges effectively forfeit and a conspiracy moving against them from the inside, Mike Lowrey and Marcus Burnett are doing what they've always done, running straight toward the most dangerous thing in the room. Only this time, the most dangerous thing in the room isn't a drug lord or a cartel assassin. It's the institution that made them. Being a fugitive is one thing. Being a fugitive in the city where you've been a cop for 25 years, where your face is on department bulletins, where half the people who might help you are currently being told you're dirty, that's something else entirely. That's the specific flavor of impossible that Bad Boys Ride or Die puts Mike and Marcus in the moment. Act 2 kicks into gear, and the film wastes absolutely no time making the walls feel tight. The city that has always been their home, Miami, with its blazing light and its layered criminal geography and its sense of always being on the edge of something, now reads differently. Every intersection is a potential checkpoint. Every cop car that rolls past is a rolling risk assessment. Mike and Marcus know this city better than almost anyone, which means they also know exactly how thoroughly it can be turned against them, and someone is doing exactly that. McGrath doesn't just want them arrested. He wants them neutralized, quickly, quietly, and in a way that forecloses any investigation into Howard's framing. The longer Mike and Marcus are out there asking questions, pulling threads, the more dangerous they become to the architecture of lies holding everything in place. So McGrath moves fast. He leverages what he has: institutional authority, corrupted channels, and a narrative about two rogue cops gone bad. And he puts a target on their backs that functions like a bounty without ever officially being called one. What follows is a stretch of the film where the tension works on two levels simultaneously. On the surface level, it's a chase, people hunting Mike and Marcus staying one step ahead. But underneath that, it's a story about what you actually have left when the official infrastructure is gone. No badge, no backup, no department resources, no clean legal standing. What remains? Who remains? The answer, it turns out, is not nobody. Dorn and Kelly, Alexander Ludwig, and Vanessa Hudgens, both returning from Bad Boys for Life, are inside the machine that's trying to dismantle their bosses, and the film handles their position with more care than you might expect from a movie primarily interested in car chases. Neither of them simply falls in line. Neither of them goes fully rogue either. They occupy this complicated middle space of people who know the truth but can't say it openly, who help where they can and cover where they must, and who are constantly calculating how much they can do before they become targets themselves. Hudgens in particular gets a few scenes where Kelly's frustration at the system, at the situation, at the fact that she can't just fix this, reads cleanly through the performance. It's not showy work. It's just honest. And it matters because it keeps the film grounded in the reality that Mike and Marcus's fight isn't purely personal. It affects everyone in their orbit, and those people are making choices too. But the cavalry these two are most counting on isn't inside the department at all. Getting Armando involved is not a clean operation, and the film is smart to let it be messy. He's not waiting in a safe house ready to deploy. He's in federal custody, in a situation that requires extraction, unofficial, off-book, and carrying significant additional legal exposure for anyone who helps make it happen. The fact that Mike goes ahead anyway tells you everything about where he's landed emotionally. This isn't purely tactical. He needs his son. Not just his son's cartel contacts and street knowledge and ability to navigate criminal networks, but Armando, specifically, the person. There's something quietly moving about watching Mike Lowrey, the man who has always operated as a lone wolf even within his partnership with Marcus, actively choosing to expand his definition of who counts as his people. He didn't grow up with Armando. He didn't choose to become a father. He found out after the fact, under the worst possible circumstances, in a situation that could have ended with either of them dead. And yet, here he is, risking what little operational cover he has left to bring this kid in. Jacob Scipio handles the complexity of Armando's position well. The character isn't fully reformed in some neat, sanitized way. He still operates with a cartel mindset, still reads situations through a lens of calculated risk versus potential gain, still carries a kind of coiled alertness that reads as dangerous even when he's technically on your side. What's interesting is how the film uses that quality. Armando isn't trying to become a cop. He's trying to become something more specific, a son who doesn't repeat his history. And that's a different kind of redemption arc, one with rougher edges and more honest ambiguity. The dynamic between Mike and Armando on the run has an energy the film hasn't quite shown before. Two men who are blood-related but essentially strangers, thrown into life or death proximity, figuring out the relationship in real time between gunfights. It's not warm and resolved. It's cautious and a little raw, and occasionally funny in the way that extremely tense situations between people who don't quite know each other yet tend to be. Then the helicopter. If Act 2 has a centerpiece, this is it, and it earns that designation. The sequence builds the way the best action set pieces do, through escalation that feels earned rather than arbitrary, where each beat raises the stakes in a way that makes logical sense within the geography of the scene, rather than just turning up the volume for its own sake. What starts as a pursuit, McGrath's people closing in on Mike and Marcus's position, becomes an aerial situation that Adel and Bilal and their team execute with a real sense of spatial clarity. You always know where everyone is, you always understand what's at risk and why a particular move is either brilliant or suicidal. The physicality of the sequence, the weight and momentum of the helicopter, the way bodies move through space when everything is going wrong mid-air, feels grounded in a way that distinguishes it from the kind of CGI-heavy chaos where you stop caring because the film has stopped caring about plausibility. There's a moment during the sequence, and if you've seen the film, you know exactly which one, where Marcus, riding high on his coma vision conviction that he literally cannot die, does something so recklessly, joyfully insane that it gets a laugh and a gasp at the same time. That's the tonal tightrope the film is walking in Act 2, and the helicopter sequence is where it walks it most confidently. The comedy and the danger aren't competing, they're amplifying each other. Marcus's fearlessness has become, paradoxically, one of their greatest tactical assets, because he will do things that no rational person would do, and it keeps working, which is both hilarious and slightly terrifying. Mike watches all of this with an expression that oscillates between genuine awe and the specific exhaustion of a man who used to be the reckless one in this partnership, and now has to watch his best friend channel that energy with none of the usual filters. Will Smith plays these reaction moments with a precision that's easy to undervalue. The comedy of those beats depends entirely on his timing, and the timing is consistently perfect. The bounty situation deepens in ways that close off one escape route after another. It isn't just law enforcement resources pointed at them, it's private, off-the-books pressure, the kind that McGrath can deploy through the cartel infrastructure he's been protecting all along, which means the people hunting Mike and Marcus aren't always wearing badges. Some of them are just hunters, operating in the gray spaces of Miami's criminal ecosystem, and they know this city's gray spaces very well. This is where the film's fugitive structure does something genuinely clever. By having McGrath operate through both official and unofficial channels, the film creates a situation where Mike and Marcus can't trust anyone they can't personally vouch for. The traditional action movie shorthand, call in backup, trust the system to sort itself out, is completely unavailable. Every resource requires a personal relationship. Every piece of help comes with a conversation, a history, a calculation about whether this person is still safe to approach. It shrinks the world around them in a way that increases the pressure steadily without requiring the film to manufacture new threats constantly. The scenes between Mike and Marcus during this stretch, the quieter ones, between the chases and the shootouts, carry a weight that sneaks up on you. They've been through everything together, but there's something specific about being truly, institutionally abandoned that strips away whatever remaining pretense of professionalism still existed between them. They're not partners right now. They're not even exactly best friends in a conventional sense. They're two people who have chosen each other as their primary loyalty at a moment when loyalty is the only currency that works, and that choice is visible in how they move, how they talk, what they don't bother to say. Marcus tells Mike at one point, and it lands with a simplicity that the film's more elaborate action beats don't quite match, that he's not afraid anymore. Not of dying, not of getting caught, not of what comes next. He's made his peace with the part of life that used to terrify him, and the freedom that comes from that is profound in a way that his "I can't die" bit occasionally obscures. Underneath the comedy is a man who genuinely confronted mortality and came out the other side lighter. Martin Lawrence plays both layers of that, the farcical and the genuine, without ever getting them confused, which is a harder tightrope to walk than it looks. By the time Act 2 is hurtling toward its close, the situation has contracted to a precise point. Resources nearly gone, officials standing completely gone, the people hunting them getting closer, better organized, more aggressive. The evidence against Howard and Mike sitting there in the system, official and stamped, waiting to become the permanent record. And yet, there's a quality to Mike and Marcus in these moments, battered, on the move, running out of options, that the film earns by not overscoring it or underlining it with a sentimental speech. They're not broken. They're not even particularly demoralized. They're focused in the way the people who have stripped everything unnecessary away from a situation tend to get focused. There's no more noise. There's only the thing they're trying to do, and each other, and the belief that those two things are enough. It's a belief the film is about to test at the very limit of what a partnership can hold. Because in Act 3, Mike is going to do something to Marcus that is simultaneously the most logical tactical decision available to him and the most emotionally devastating thing one of these two men has ever done to the other. But that's coming. First, the swamp. Everything converges in the Everglades. That choice of location is worth pausing on for a second, because it isn't accidental. Miami, the city that has been the franchise's heartbeat across all 4 films, gets traded for something rawer and older in the film's final act. The Everglades are not Miami. There's no neon, no architecture, no, the city is a character glamour. It's swamp water and sawgrass and alligators and silence broken only by gunfire. It's the kind of place where the infrastructure of institutional power, the chain of command, the official narrative, the paper trail, means absolutely nothing. Out there, the only thing that determines what happens is who's standing when it's over. Adil and Bilal understand the geometry of that choice. The entire film has been about Mike and Marcus being stripped of every systemic resource they had. The badge, the department, the legal standing, the official channels. By the time the finale arrives, that stripping is complete, and so the location matches. This isn't going to get resolved in a courtroom or a press conference or through some elegant bureaucratic reversal. It's going to get resolved in the mud, between people, the way things in this franchise have always ultimately gotten resolved. McGrath's exposure in the third act comes not through a single revelation, but through accumulation. Threads that Mike, Marcus, and Armando have been pulling across Act 2 finally connect in a way that makes the picture undeniable. The specific individuals who can place McGrath at the intersection of law enforcement and the criminal network he was supposedly dismantling. It's not a courtroom case yet. It's not clean enough for that, but it's real, and it's enough to know exactly who they're dealing with and what he'll do to protect himself. Eric Dane plays McGrath's unraveling with a particular kind of controlled desperation that makes him more threatening in the finale than he was in the film's more procedural middle section. When a man like McGrath, organized, patient, operating through systems, is forced out into the open where systems can't protect him, he doesn't collapse. He escalates. He brings maximum force to bear. He stops being careful. And a villain who has stopped being careful is a different and more visceral kind of dangerous than one who is still calculating. The confrontation the film has been building toward doesn't play out as a clean action sequence with a satisfying choreography. It's messy and loud and expensive in the way of lives rather than just property. People get hurt who shouldn't. Resources get burned. The physical toll of the entire film, all those chases and crashes and barely escaped situations, lands on Mike and Marcus with compounded weight by the time the swamp is doing what the swamp does to everyone standing in it. Secretary Lockwood. Rhea Seehorn, in a role that functions as the institutional counterweight to McGrath's corruption, becomes crucial in this act. Seehorn is one of the more interesting casting choices the film makes, and not just because she's exceptional, she is, but that's almost table stakes at this point in her career. Her Lockwood represents something the franchise doesn't usually make space for, a figure of genuine institutional authority who's actually trying to do the right thing, not as naivety, but as a deliberate and costly choice. When the evidence about McGrath begins reaching her, the film gives her the kind of intelligence and moral clarity that makes you believe she'll act on it, and act fast. That she does, but not fast enough to prevent what happens next. Mike shoots Marcus. Sit with that for a second. In a franchise built entirely on the bond between these two men, where the central dramatic and comedic engine has always been their interdependence, their loyalty, the way each one would do anything for the other, Mike Lowrey raises a gun at Marcus Burnett and pulls the trigger. The circumstances are specific. Marcus, riding his "I cannot die" conviction into the finale with full commitment, has put himself in a position where he is the obstacle between McGrath's escape and McGrath's capture. The tactical situation is such that someone has to be the bait, has to absorb incoming fire, has to give the operation a chance to land. And Marcus, freed from the fear that used to govern his every instinct, volunteers himself for this role with the cheerful certainty of a man who has already made peace with the worst possible outcome. Mike understands the situation. He also understands that Marcus's certainty about his own invincibility is not, in fact, a documented medical fact. It's a faith position. It's a coma dream, interpreted as divine mandate. And for most of the film, Mike has been willing to let Marcus run with that conviction because it's been working. And because who is he to argue with something that keeps getting them both out of impossible situations alive? But here, with everything on the line, with McGrath moving and the operation balanced on a knife's edge, Mike makes the calculation that no good partner should ever have to make. He shoots Marcus himself, in a non-fatal but genuinely debilitating location. Controlled, deliberate, to create a specific tactical outcome that couldn't be created any other way. It works. The operation succeeds because of it, and Marcus is furious in a way that the film earns completely. What makes the scene land, and it does land, harder than almost anything else in the film, is the combination of what the action means within the story and what it means for the relationship, because Marcus's anger isn't just about the physical fact of having been shot by his best friend. It's about the violation of something they've built across 30 years of partnership. The unspoken contract that says, "I will do anything for you, but I will not decide for you. I will put myself in danger for you, but I will not choose your danger for you." Mike made a unilateral call about Marcus's life, and he was right, and it doesn't matter that he was right. Will Smith plays the aftermath of that moment with a rawness that's genuinely surprising. He doesn't try to justify it smoothly. He doesn't get defensive. He sits in the full weight of what he did and waits to see if Marcus will let him back in. That stillness, the absence of the usual Mike Lowrey deflection and bravado, tells you more about where this character has traveled over 4 films than almost any explicit piece of dialogue could. Martin Lawrence, for his part, doesn't play Marcus's anger as something that gets neatly resolved in the space of a conversation. There's a scene where the two of them are just with each other, not reconciled yet, not at war, but somewhere in that raw in-between space where the love is still there and the wound is still fresh and both things are true at the same time. It's the film's most honest emotional moment, and it comes right at the point where most action movies would be rushing toward the triumphant hug and the swelling score. The resolution of Howard's name is both the film's stated external goal and, by the time it arrives, almost secondary to what's happened between Mike and Marcus. But the film handles it with appropriate weight. The evidence that Howard was framed, the communications, the financial paper trail that leads back to McGrath, the testimony of people inside McGrath's operation that couldn't surface until he was neutralized, gets to Lockwood and through her to the system. And the system, imperfect and slow and occasionally corrupt as it is, does what systems eventually do. When given clean evidence and a motivated official, it corrects. Howard's name is cleared, not quietly, not bureaucratically, publicly, in the kind of way that matters in an institutional context, where the record gets set right, where the false narrative gets officially reversed, where the people who built their career on that lie have to watch it dismantle. There's a moment, brief, without dialogue, just a visual, that functions as the film's emotional closing statement on this thread. It involves Howard's name and a symbol of how the department remembers its own, and it hits with the exact kind of quiet, earned sentiment that big emotional moments need to avoid tipping into manipulation. It doesn't overstay, it just lands and moves on. The film's closing beats are warm without being saccharine, which is harder than it sounds. Mike and Christine's marriage is intact. Marcus and Teresa are intact. Armando's situation is not fully resolved, deliberately so, the loose end left for whatever comes next. But his relationship with Mike has moved from wary and transactional to something that actually resembles family, however unconventional the shape of it. And Mike and Marcus, who have been through more in this film than arguably any previous installment, who have been betrayed by their institution, chased across the state, shot at from the air and the ground, and forced to make the kind of choices that lesser partnerships wouldn't survive, are still standing, not untouched, not unchanged, but standing and together. The final exchange between them doesn't require much. This is a franchise that has always understood that its two leads can communicate everything that needs to be said with 3 words, a look, and 30 years of history in the room. The banter is still there. The edge is still there. But underneath it now is something that wasn't quite as visible in earlier films. A recognition that this specific thing, this partnership, this 25-year argument and 25-year love story between two wildly different men who chose each other anyway, is the rarest thing either of them has. They rode. They almost died. They're still here. For now. Start with what's new, because that's where the interesting work is. Across 3 previous films, Mike Lowrey has been one of cinema's more consistent portraits of a specific kind of masculine invulnerability. He's rich, independently, suspiciously so for a cop, a detail the franchise acknowledged, and then built an entire backstory around. He's immaculate. The suits, the cars, the haircut, the walk that says, "I have never once been unsure of myself in a public space." He's lethal. Technically brilliant in a fight, operating with a confidence that borders on pathology. And through all of it, through drug lords and assassins and discovering he had a secret son, through the loss of people he loved in situations that would break most people in half, he never cracked. Not really. Ride or Die cracks him, quietly, specifically, and in a way that the film is careful never to sensationalize. The panic attack at his own wedding is the opening signal, and it's worth understanding what the film is actually saying with it. Mike Lowrey has been running on adrenaline as a life philosophy for 25 years. Adrenaline is useful when you're being shot at. It is, it turns out, much less useful when the immediate threat is standing at an altar trying to make a vow. The nervous system that has kept him functional in genuinely extreme conditions doesn't have a lower gear. It doesn't know how to just be somewhere. And the wedding, peaceful, joyful, exactly what he should want, triggers the same physiological response as combat, because his body has been in combat mode for so long it doesn't remember the difference. This isn't played as weakness in any traditional sense. The film doesn't shame Mike for it, doesn't use it as a comedic punchline, doesn't resolve it with a quick epiphany that fixes everything. It just establishes it as real, and then carries it forward as a lens through which you watch everything else he does. Will Smith understands his character at a bone-deep level at this point. 4 films and nearly 30 years of inhabiting him, and what he does with the panic attack material is fold it into Mike's behavior without making it the headline. You see it in the way Mike sometimes goes very still in moments that would previously have had him all forward momentum and heat. You see it in the way he processes Marcus's fearlessness, not just with amusement, but with something that looks occasionally like envy. Marcus has found his peace with mortality. Mike hasn't. And that gap between them, which has never existed before in quite this form, generates a quiet, dramatic friction that runs under every scene they share. The shooting. Marcus' decision is the apex of Mike's character arc, and it deserves to be understood, not just as a plot beat, but as a psychological portrait. What Mike does in that moment is fundamentally the same thing he has always done. Assess the situation, identify the most efficient path to the desired outcome, execute without hesitation. The machinery is identical to every tactical decision he has ever made. What's different is the target. And what makes it devastating is that Mike knows, even as he pulls the trigger, that being right doesn't make it okay, that Marcus's anger will be earned, that the partnership will have to absorb this and decide whether it can hold it. For a character who has spent 30 years being the one who doesn't flinch, who decides and acts while other people are still deciding, having to sit with the consequence of that decisiveness when the consequence is a gunshot wound in his best friend's body is a genuinely new kind of reckoning. Will Smith doesn't play the aftermath with the usual Mike Lowrey forward lean. He goes quiet. He goes still in a different way than the panic attacks. Not frozen, but present, waiting, bearing the weight of what he's done without trying to manage it away. It's some of the best dramatic work Smith does in the film, and it happens in the spaces between the action rather than during it. Easy to miss if you're not watching for it. Worth watching for. There's also the father thread to reckon with, because it runs through everything Mike does in Ride or Die, even when it's not explicitly the subject of a scene. The decision to extract Armando, to bring him into a situation that is already dangerous and make it more dangerous by adding the liability of a federal prisoner, is, on its face, tactical. But the film is too honest to let it stay purely tactical. Mike needs Armando the way you need people who are specifically yours, not just useful. He's figuring out in real time, under the worst possible conditions, what it means to have a son. Not a partner, not an asset, a son. What does Mike Lowrey, who was raised by a cartel family after his parents' murder, who has spent his entire adult life substituting professional loyalty for the family structure he never had, what does a man like that do with the unexpected gift of a biological child? Not cleanly, not with any playbook to consult. He does it the way he does everything, by showing up, by making the call, by being there even when being there is complicated. It's not a perfect portrait of fatherhood, it's a real one. Marcus, Burnett, the man who stopped being afraid. If Mike's arc in this film is about a crack appearing in the armor, Marcus's arc is about an armor being removed entirely, and what's left underneath being, against all expectation, something lighter than anyone anticipated. Martin Lawrence has always been the emotional core of this franchise in a way that sometimes gets undersold because Marcus is nominally the comedy. He's the one who wants to retire, the one who worries, the one whose domesticity is played for laughs against Mike's bachelor playboy lifestyle, the reluctant partner, the sensible one. The guy who has to be dragged into every situation that Mike walks into voluntarily and enthusiastic. That dynamic has been the comedic engine of 4 movies, and Ride or Die finds a genuinely inventive way to dismantle it completely. The coma dream sequence. Marcus in some liminal space, Howard waiting for him there. The theological negotiation of whether this is Marcus's time is played with a warmth and a specificity that earns what it's trying to do. Martin Lawrence and Joe Pantoliano have a chemistry that the franchise has cultivated carefully over the years. Howard is always exasperated by Marcus, always slightly contemptuous of his lack of cool, and yet obviously, unmistakably fond of him. Their dynamic in the coma sequence carries all of that history and layers it with the particular poignancy of a conversation between the living and the dead, between the man who got out and the man who's still deciding whether to stay. Marcus comes back convinced, not theoretically convinced, not I feel better about things, convinced, but specifically, literally, functionally convinced that he has been granted divine invincibility, that God has looked at Marcus Burnett's file, reviewed the evidence, and decided that the man is not done yet in a way that can't be undone by bullets. Lawrence plays this not as delusion, but as liberation. There's a difference, and it matters enormously for how the film works. A delusional character doing reckless things is either a tragedy or a farce. A liberated character doing reckless things is something funnier and more interesting. It's a man who has genuinely renegotiated his relationship with fear and whose behavior now flows from that renegotiation rather than from a failure of perception. Marcus knows there are guns. He knows people are trying to kill him. He just doesn't care anymore. Because the worst thing has already been named, stared down, and the name it gave back was, not yet. The comedy of Marcus's fearlessness is sharp throughout Act 2 and into Act 3. The helicopter moment, the swamp sequence, various confrontations that Marcus approaches with an enthusiasm that leaves the people pointing guns at him briefly confused about what kind of situation they're actually in. But Lawrence never lets the comedy crowd out the emotional reality. There's a scene, quieter than the action beats, conversational, almost casual, where Marcus explains to Mike why he's not scared anymore. Not the coma theology of it, but the human version, that he saw what was waiting, and it was Howard. And Howard was annoyed, and somehow that specific vision of the afterlife. Not paradise, not fire, just Howard, irritated to see him, made the whole thing manageable. It's a perfectly constructed piece of character writing, and Lawrence delivers it with the exact kind of underplayed sincerity that a lesser actor would dress up in more obvious sentiment. He trusts the words, he trusts the moment, and the result is one of those scenes you find yourself thinking about later, separately from the action, as the thing you actually remember most clearly from the film. The anger after Mike shoots him is real. Lawrence doesn't soften it. Marcus's fury in that scene is the flip side of his liberation, because the freedom from fear of death doesn't mean he stopped caring about the nature of the relationship with his best friend. He's not upset that he was shot. He's upset about what it meant that he was shot. The choice Mike made. The assumption embedded in that choice, which is that Mike's tactical judgment supersedes Marcus's autonomy over his own body and his own risk. After 30 years of being treated as the cautious one, the one whose fear is a liability, the one whose reluctance needs to be overcome, Marcus has finally arrived at a place of genuine fearlessness. And the first thing Mike does is shoot him because he's being too fearless. That irony is devastating, and the film is aware of it. Lawrence and Smith play the aftermath without resolution, which is the right call. Some things take longer than a movie's final act to fully absorb, and the script is honest enough to let that be true here. The partnership. 30 years of chosen family. You can't analyze Mike and Marcus as isolated characters without eventually talking about the thing between them, because for both of them, the other person is the defining relationship of their adult lives, more formative than their marriages, more constitutive of who they are than any other professional or personal bond. That's an extraordinary thing to say about two men who would both probably be too proud to say it themselves, which is part of what makes it interesting. The buddy cop genre has produced a lot of iconic pairings. Riggs and Murtaugh, Carter and Lee. The template is well established. The mismatched partners whose friction generates both comedy and drama, who complete each other's deficiencies, who protect each other from their own worst impulses. Mike and Marcus fit this template and then gradually, over the course of 4 films, transcended it. What separates them from the genre template at this point is the weight of shared history. By Ride or Die, these are two men who have been through things together that genuinely bond people in ways that can't be replicated or replaced. They've lost people together. They've saved each other's lives more times than either of them could count. They disagreed about fundamental things, how to live, what to prioritize, what the job is actually for, and kept choosing the partnership anyway. That accumulated weight changes how every scene between them reads. When they bicker in Ride or Die, it doesn't read as friction between personalities. It reads as two people who know each other so completely that the bickering is actually a form of intimacy, the kind you can only achieve with someone you've stopped needing to impress. The comedy of their dynamic in this film is richer than in the earlier installments precisely because the relationship underneath it is deeper. You laugh at the argument partly because you can see the love in the argument. Smith and Lawrence's chemistry is genuinely difficult to fabricate. You can put two talented actors in a room together and not get what these two have, because what they have comes from actual years of working together, from the specific way they've learned each other's rhythms and timing and instincts. There's a scene in Ride or Die, one of the quieter ones, no guns or chases, just the two of them in a room trying to figure out their next move, where they finish each other's tactical thinking without either of them remarking on it. No, exactly. No, I was just thinking that. They just move through the conversation the way people do who share a language that's been refined over decades. It's a tiny moment. It's also, somehow, the most convincing evidence the film offers for the depth of what these two have built. The role reversal this film executes, Marcus fearless, Mike anxious, doesn't undermine what came before. It deepens it, because now we can see both of them from the other side of the equation. We can see what Mike looked like to Marcus all those years, the terrifying, thrilling experience of watching someone you love walk toward danger with zero apparent self-preservation instinct. We can see what Marcus looked like to Mike, the grounding, stabilizing reality of having someone beside you who will weigh the consequences. They've lived each other's experience now. The understanding between them, which was already substantial, has gained a new dimension that the franchise never had before. That's genuinely good character writing, the kind that rewards the long-term investment of watching multiple films. Armando, redemption with rough edges. Jacob Scipio's Armando is doing something more complicated than the franchise's previous supporting characters have been asked to do, and he's doing it well enough that the film's emotional ambition on this front actually lands. The complication is this: Armando isn't a reformed villain in any clean sense. His redemption in Bad Boys for Life was real. He turned on the people he worked for, saved Mike's life, made a genuine moral choice under pressure. But the world he came from doesn't just disappear because you've made a good choice. The cartel knowledge, the criminal network fluency, the specific way he reads threats and calculates exits, all of that is still operational in him, still the primary lens through which he processes situations. He isn't trying to be a cop. He isn't trying to become Mike. He's trying to be something new, and the territory of new doesn't have a map. What Scipio brings to the role is a quality of coiled watchfulness that keeps the character interesting in scenes that would flatten a lesser actor into pure utility. Armando is never just the plot device who knows the cartel guy. He's always also the person figuring out who he is in relation to the father he only recently found. In a situation that is objectively terrible, with no framework for how father-son relationships are supposed to work in these circumstances because there is no framework. This situation has never existed before. The scenes between him and Mike have a tentative quality that the film earns by not rushing. They're not going to resolve 20-something years of absence in the time it takes to escape a helicopter crash. What they're doing instead is establishing baseline trust, learning each other's competency, each other's instincts, whether the other person can be counted on when the situation goes sideways. It's the foundation before the foundation, and it's more honest than a fast-tracked emotional reconciliation would have been. There's also something specific the film does with Armando that's worth noting. In most franchise narratives, a character who joins the main duo's mission takes on a supporting role that's functionally subordinate. They help, they follow, they occasionally contribute a key piece of information. Armando doesn't do that. He has his own tactical thinking, his own approach to problems, and more than once he reads a situation faster than Mike does, from angles Mike simply doesn't have access to. The film lets him be competent on his own terms, which is how you keep a character from becoming a plot decoration, and it's why Armando feels like a genuine addition to the franchise's character landscape rather than just a device. James McGrath. The institutional villain, Eric Danes McGrath, works as well as he does because the film never tries to make him something other than what he is, a man who chose power over integrity and who is now burning everything in reach to protect that choice. He's not theatrical about it. He doesn't seem to enjoy the villainy. What makes McGrath genuinely chilling, in a way that differs meaningfully from the franchise's previous antagonists, who tended toward the operatically malevolent, is his pragmatism. He frames a dead man not out of sadism but out of efficiency. Howard is dead, so Howard's reputation is a usable resource. Mike is discreditable, so his discrediting becomes a tactical option. The people around him are obstacles or tools, and he applies that calculus with the same impassive competence with which he presumably built his career. Dane plays this with a stillness that communicates exactly how dangerous stillness can be. McGrath doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't get agitated, he adjusts. Someone closes off one avenue, he opens another. Someone gets too close to the truth, the response is measured and immediate and cold. He is the system turned against itself, a man who knows how institutions work from the inside and is using that knowledge to hollow them out for personal benefit. In the context of a film where the central theme is loyalty versus institution, McGrath is the embodiment of what happens when someone chooses institution and then corrupts it, something worse than an external enemy because it wears a familiar face and speaks a familiar language. His unraveling in Act 3 is satisfying not because it's elaborate, but because it's appropriate. The evidence is real. The institution that protected him has been given a reason to turn, and the man who operated through systems finds himself without a system to operate through. What's left is just a man in a swamp, and a man in a swamp against Mike and Marcus has already lost. The supporting landscape. The film's supporting cast doesn't get the space for deep character work, but several of them use their limited screen real estate smartly. Rhea Seehorn's Lockwood is the pleasant surprise. Seehorn is almost constitutionally incapable of playing a character without interiority. Every role she takes, she finds the thinking behind the behavior, and Lockwood is no exception. The character could easily have been a flat institutional functionary, the official who eventually does the right thing as a plot mechanism. Instead, Seehorn gives her a quality of careful attention. You get the sense that Lockwood is always reading the room, always doing more internal work than she's showing externally, always 3 steps ahead of what she's saying out loud. When she finally acts against McGrath, it feels like the product of a specific, considered decision rather than a scripted inevitability. Vanessa Hudgens Kelly and Alexander Ludwig's Dorn don't get enormous amounts of space in this installment, but the film uses them smartly as the human face of the institutional dilemma. They're not abstract representatives of the department. They're specific people who have worked alongside Mike and Marcus, who know these men, and who are now being told by the institution that employs them that the men they know are criminals. The dissonance of that position is registered by both actors without overplaying it. They're carrying a heavy thing quietly, which is exactly right for characters whose primary function is to demonstrate that the conspiracy's damage isn't contained to the 2 main targets. Joe Pantoliano's Howard 2, present only in Marcus's coma vision, gets 1 scene in the entire film and threads 30 years of franchise history through it. Pantoliano understands that what Howard means in this film is different from what he meant in the previous 3. He's not a character now, he's a symbol. The relationship Marcus had with him, the integrity that was being defamed, the specific flavor of exasperated love that characterized every interaction Howard ever had with these 2 men. Pantoliano hits all of it in a scene that isn't very long, and the fact that Howard's presence in a dream sequence carries genuine emotional weight is a testament to what 3 movies of consistent character work can build. Tasha Smith, stepping into the recast role of Teresa Burnett, brings an immediate warmth and authenticity to the character that earns Teresa's place in the emotional closing beats of the film. The recasting is visible. Teresa Randall originated the role and brought her own specific energy to it, but Smith makes her own Teresa quickly and without apology. There's a scene where Teresa's worry for Marcus operates not as nagging, wife as comedy, but as the legitimate anxiety of a woman watching the man she loves walk toward danger with unusual cheerfulness. And Smith plays the complicated mixture of terror and pride in that with real honesty. The ensemble as ecosystem. What Bad Boys, Ride or Die ultimately demonstrates about its characters is that the franchise has built something rare over 30 years, an ensemble where the relationships between people feel genuinely inhabited rather than written. The bonds have texture. The history is legible in how people talk to each other, what they skip over because it doesn't need to be said, what they argue about because it does. None of this happens by accident. It's the product of the same actors returning, of writers who understand that franchise longevity is built on character consistency, and of directors who recognize that the emotional scenes are not the breaks between the action sequences, but the reason the action sequences mean anything at all. When Mike and Marcus stand together at the end of this film, battered, cleared, still together, you believe it in a way that goes beyond what any single movie could create. You believe it because you've been watching these two people for 30 years, across 4 movies and a dozen near-death experiences and several significant personal crises and about 10,000 one-liners. The emotional payoff belongs to all of it, not just this installment. That's the rarest thing a franchise can build. These two have built it. Some films call for stillness and deliberation. Some call for geometric precision. Some call for the camera to be invisible, a pure window rather than a presence. Robrecht Heijvaart, the Belgian cinematographer who shot both Bad Boys for Life and Ride or Die, made a very specific philosophy decision for this 4th installment. The camera should run. Not in the chaotic, dizzying, handheld as default way that a lot of modern action movies use shaky cam as a substitute for choreographic clarity, but in the purposeful way, the camera as fugitive, the camera as participant in the chase rather than observer of it. The camera moves the way Mike and Marcus move, always slightly ahead of where things are, always adjusted for the next development, never quite settled. In a 2024 interview, Heijvaart was explicit about this shift. He talked about increasing the handheld work significantly from Bad Boys for Life, which already had more kinetic energy than the Bay films cinematographically, to Ride or Die as a conscious decision to make the camera's physical behavior match the narrative's physical reality. These are fugitive. They don't have fixed positions. They don't operate from a stable base. So neither does the camera.jai. What separates this approach from generic shaky cam is control. You can tell the difference between a camera that's handheld because the cinematographer is making choices and a camera that's handheld because movement reads as energy in a trailer. Heijvaart's work throughout Ride or Die is always legible. You always understand the geography of a space, always know where the relevant bodies are relative to each other, always have enough visual information to process what's happening without having to reconstruct it afterward. The handhelds creates feeling, pressure, momentum, the physical sensation of things being in motion, without sacrificing comprehension, which is the bargain that a lot of action cinematography fails to strike. Watch how the camera behaves in the film's dialogue scenes, not just the action sequences. This is where Heijvaart's philosophy reveals itself most clearly, because it would have been easy to go handheld for the action and locked off for the conversation. Instead, there's a subtle ongoing movement even in quieter scenes, a gentle push-in during an emotionally significant exchange, a slight adjustment that reframes the shot almost imperceptibly as the conversation shifts. The camera is listening. It's responding. It's treating the human scenes with the same kinetic interest it brings to the physical ones, which creates a unified visual grammar across the film rather than the jarring gear change between action mode and drama mode that characterizes cinematography on autopilot. The push-in during dramatic beats is particularly well deployed. There's a scene, the quieter Mike and Marcus aftermath of the shooting, where the camera does almost nothing at all for most of the exchange, and then makes one very slow, very deliberate move closer at exactly the moment the emotional weight peaks. It's the kind of shot that a viewer registers emotionally without consciously identifying the mechanism. You feel the intimacy increase. You feel the scene tighten. You don't think, the camera moved. You just feel closer, and you don't know why. That's craft operating at the level where it disappears into experience. Light and Miami. Miami as a visual location has been used so many times by so many productions, in crime dramas, in music videos, in the franchise's own 3 previous installments, that finding a fresh relationship with it is genuinely challenging. Heijvaart doesn't try to reinvent Miami. Instead, he leans into its most extreme visual qualities and uses them as psychological temperature rather than postcard aesthetics. The light in Ride or Die is aggressive. Miami's natural light is already intense. High sun, hard shadows, the specific quality of illumination you get off water and glass, and pale concrete in a subtropical climate. Heijvaart pushes this rather than softening it. The wedding sequence opens in a blaze of it. The chases happen in it. The city isn't glamorized exactly, it's exposed, which is a different relationship. Under that light, you can't hide. Everything is visible. And for a film about 2 men who have been stripped of their cover and are operating entirely in the open, the visual language of unavoidable exposure is doing real thematic work. The contrast when the film moves to the Everglades is correspondingly striking. The swamp's diffuse, filtered light, green and humid and soft in a way that Miami's urban light never is, lands as a visual relief and a visual threat simultaneously. Relief because the harshness is gone. Threat because the familiar visual vocabulary of the franchise's setting has been stripped away. In the Everglades, Miami's rules don't apply. The light tells you that before the plot does. Night scenes in the film use Miami's artificial light, neon, sodium vapor, the underwater glow of pools and clubs, with an eye for color that keeps them visually alive without tipping into stylization for its own sake. There's a specific blue-green palette in some of the nighttime exterior sequences that connects to the water geography of Miami in an almost unconscious way. The city bleeds into the frame as color even when the water isn't directly visible. The action sequences, built, not assembled. Here's the thing that distinguishes the action sequences in Ride or Die from the action sequences in a lot of comparable franchise entries. They were designed rather than assembled. There's a difference. Assembled action is when you shoot a lot of things happening and figure out in the editing room how it becomes a sequence. Designed action is when you start with the sequence's dramatic purpose, what it needs to establish about character, what it needs to do emotionally, where it needs to begin and end, and build the physical choreography from that foundation. Adil and Bilal learned something important from Bad Boys for Life and applied it with more confidence here. The action sequences have to be doing two things at once. They have to be physically satisfying, kinetic, well-staged, spatially clear, and they have to be advancing the emotional story of the specific characters inside them. When both things are happening simultaneously, you get action that matters. When only one is happening, you get spectacle, which is less. The wedding opener. The wedding sequence isn't primarily an action sequence, it's a character establishment piece disguised as a celebratory scene, which makes it more interesting. The panic attack happens in the midst of a moment that should be pure joy. The heart attack follows. These two events, one internal and psychological, one physical and medical, set up the film's entire character architecture before anything else has begun. The shooting hasn't started yet, the conspiracy hasn't surfaced yet, and already the film has done more character work than most action movies manage in their entire runtime. Adil and Bilal shoot the wedding with a looseness that feels genuine. The handheld work here is specifically calibrated to the chaotic warmth of a large party, the way that kind of event doesn't have clean sight lines or orderly movement. It makes the happiness feel real, which makes the panic attack land harder when it comes, which makes Marcus's collapse land harder when that comes. The sequence understands that emotional impact is proportional to the foundation of normalcy it disturbs, the helicopter crash. This is the film's most technically ambitious set piece, and it earns that ambition because of how clearly it understands what it's trying to achieve. The sequence begins with geography. You know the space. You know who is where. You know what the terrain looks like and what constraints it places on movement. When the helicopter enters the situation, it's introduced with purpose. Here is what this changes. Here is what this closes off. Here is what it enables. The choreography of the sequence follows from that logical introduction rather than materializing from nowhere. What Adil and Bilal and their stunt and visual effects teams do particularly well is keep the physical stakes legible throughout the escalation. Helicopters have weight. They have momentum. They move through space in ways that are constrained by physics, in ways that cars aren't, which gives the sequence a different quality of tension than a car chase. More vertical, more three-dimensional, less amenable to the familiar grammar of vehicular pursuit that action movies have trained audiences to read automatically. When things go wrong with a helicopter, the wrongness feels mechanical and physical in a way that lands differently than a car crash. Marcus's fearlessness gets its headline moment in this sequence, the beat where he does something in or around the helicopter that is so obviously, cartoonishly suicidal that it produces that simultaneous laugh and gasp response that only the best tonal balancing acts in action comedy can generate. What makes it work technically is the commitment of the staging. It isn't winking at the audience. It's playing the reality of the situation with complete physical seriousness, while the character inside it treats it with complete emotional casualness. That gap between serious staging and casual performance is where the comedy lives, and Adil and Bilal hold it precisely. The crash itself, when it comes, uses practical elements in combination with visual effects in a way that keeps the impact feeling physical and consequential. There's a tangibility to the wreckage that distinguishes it from a purely digital sequence. You can feel the weight of things, the heat, the disorder of aftermath. It matters. The swamp finale. Where the helicopter sequence is kinetic and vertical, the swamp finale is horizontal and muddy and deliberately unglamorous. The Everglades don't allow for the visual polish of Miami's urban action geography. Things get wet. People slip. The terrain resists the kind of clean choreographic execution that cityscapes enable. This is an intentional design choice, and it's the right one. The finale needs to feel like an ending. Not in the everything is resolved cleanly sense, but in the we have stripped everything back to the irreducible core sense. In the swamp, there's no infrastructure. There are no systems. There are just people, and the consequences of their choices and alligators. The alligators, for what it's worth, are used with exactly the right amount of absurdist self-awareness, enough to get the laugh, not so much that the actual stakes evaporate. The fight choreography in the swamp prioritizes effect over style in a way that distinguishes it from the film's earlier sequences. Nobody here is moving with the fluid precision of trained professionals operating in optimal conditions. They're moving the way people move when they're exhausted and wet and the ground is trying to swallow them. It reads as real, in a way that more polished action sometimes doesn't. And by the time the film has arrived here, that reality is exactly what the emotional temperature of the story calls for. Diting, the rhythm underneath. Murphy Dumont's editing on Ride or Die works best when it's doing something specific to the franchise's tonal identity, maintaining the comedy-action balance without letting either register flatten the other. The intercutting during action sequences is spatially clear, which should be a low bar but often isn't. You always understand the geometry of the situation. Cut to close-up, cut to wide, cut to reaction. The sequencing follows an emotional logic rather than a random motion logic, and the result is action that you can watch at full speed and still process rather than action you have to re-watch to understand. The comedy editing is sharper. Some of the best laugh moments in the film exist specifically because of where a cut happens, the timing of a reaction shot, the decision to hold on a face slightly longer than expected, the choice to cut away from a joke before it's fully resolved and let the audience's imagination finish it. Martin Lawrence's comedy in particular benefits enormously from this. Several of his best moments in the film land harder because of when the film cuts away from him rather than when it stays. The edit trusts the performance, which is the only way to edit comedy well. The film's pacing is brisk without being exhausting, which is a specific achievement for a 115-minute action movie that has a lot of ground to cover. There are genuine breathers, scenes that exist at a lower metabolic rate, that let the film catch its breath and let the audience do the same. And they're spaced with an awareness of how much sustained intensity a viewer can absorb before it starts to diminish in impact. Some franchise films forget this. Ride or Die doesn't. Lorne, Balfe and the Sonic, Identity of Miami. Lorne Balfe's score for Ride or Die doesn't reinvent the franchise's sonic language, and it isn't trying to. What it does is maintain the specific pulse. The Miami-inflected combination of electronic energy and brass-forward momentum that has characterized the series since the first film, while finding room within that established language for the tonal variations this installment requires. The wedding sequence gets a score that's celebratory in a slightly over-the-top way that functions almost as dramatic irony. You can hear the happiness being set up to be disrupted. It's not subtle, but it isn't meant to be. Action comedies can use score as comedic counterpoint, and Balfe understands when to play into the genre's theatrical relationship with music. The tension sequences in Act 2 use a more stripped-back approach, percussive, tight, relying more on rhythm than on melodic development. This is the score operating as infrastructure rather than as expressive element, which is the right call. When the film is at its most functionally urgent, the music's job is to maintain momentum and pressure, not to direct your emotional response. Balfe's background in high-stakes action scoring, he's done everything from Mission Impossible to Black Adam, means he has a natural fluency for this, and it shows. The moments that actually surprise you musically are the quieter ones. The underscore during the Mike and Marcus aftermath of the shooting scene, for instance, does something genuinely delicate. It supports without swelling, maintains a presence without pushing, allows the performances to breathe while keeping the emotional space from going completely cold. It's the kind of compositional restraint that gets missed in reviews, but registers in experience as a scene working without quite being able to articulate why. The sound design more broadly uses Miami's sonic character with the same awareness that the cinematography uses its visual character. The city has a specific acoustic identity: the open-air clubs, the water, the helicopter traffic, the specific pitch of heat, and the film treats these elements as part of its palette rather than neutral background. During the swamp sequence, the absence of urban sound, the sudden shift to insect noise and water, and the specific ancient quiet of the Everglades lands as a disorientation that mirrors the character's own disorientation to being somewhere without their usual infrastructure. Sound design at its best is invisible and present simultaneously, telling you things about where you are and what things mean without announcing itself. Ride or Die's sound team understands this. Direction. The Adil and Bilal signature. What distinguishes Adil and Bilal's directorial approach across both their Bad Boys installments is something that takes a minute to name because it isn't a stylistic flourish or an obvious visual signature. It's an attitude toward the material, a combination of genuine love for the genre and genuine care for the characters that keeps the films from ever feeling cynical about what they're doing. Action comedies can curdle into self-parody when the filmmakers start winking too hard at the audience, essentially saying, "We know this is silly, and we want credit for knowing that." Adil and Bilal never do this. They play the genre completely straight. The stakes are real, the characters are real, the physical reality of the action is real, while maintaining a tonal lightness that prevents any of it from becoming grim. It's a directorial position that requires constant calibration, and they hold it well. Michael Bay had a cameo in the film as a Porsche driver, a small, knowing gesture that functions as the franchise, explicitly passing a torch. Bay built the visual language that Adel and Bilal inherited, modified, and in key ways improved upon. The cameo is a handshake, an acknowledgement, one era recognizing another without either diminishing what the other represents. It's a small thing. It's also, for franchise enthusiasts, kind of perfect. The director's Belgian-Moroccan background brings something to this franchise that Bay's work didn't have, a perspective on American institutions, on the mythology of American cops that comes from slightly outside it. But they also look at the buddy cop mythology, the idea that two men with badges can be the heroes in a deeply complicated landscape, with a complexity of feeling that shows up as nuance in how they frame the institutional betrayal at the film's core. The system turns on Mike and Marcus not as an abstract plot device, but as a specific kind of institutional failure that Adel and Bilal treat with a weight and specificity that suggests they find it genuinely interesting, not just convenient. It's a franchise that started as spectacle and arrived, under their direction, as something that occasionally resembles a meditation on loyalty. That evolution doesn't happen without filmmakers who care about more than the set pieces. Adel and Bilal care about more than the set pieces, and the set pieces are still great. R.I.D. or D, not a title, a philosophy. Most action movie titles are labels. They describe the film's content, what happens, who's in it, where it takes place, without making any particular claim about meaning. Bad Boys. Ride or Die is doing something different. The title is a thesis. It's a statement about how these two men have organized their lives and what that organization has cost them and what it's given them in return. By the time the credits roll, the phrase isn't decoration anymore. It's a conclusion you've watched being earned across 2 hours of extremely loud evidence. Ride or Die, as a cultural expression, predates this franchise by decades. It comes from a tradition of describing unconditional loyalty, the commitment to stay with someone through every possible version of their circumstances, including the ones that end badly. Not I'll be here when things are good. Not I'll be here when things are manageable. But I will be here in the absolute worst version of your life, and the fact that it might kill me is not a reason to leave. That's what the phrase means at its most serious. That's what the film is about at its most serious. The surface plot, fugitives on the run, conspiracy to unravel, dead captain's name to clear, is the delivery mechanism for this theme, not the theme itself. Strip the car chases and the shootouts and the alligators away, and what you have is a story about what two people owe each other when everything else is gone. When the institution is turned. When the official story has been written against you, when the resources have dried up and the options have narrowed to a point, what's left? Who's left? The answer this film gives, consistently, explicitly, and with genuine conviction, is each other. Always each other. Loyalty? Past. Death. The Howard thread is where the film's themes do their most interesting work, and it's the layer that elevates Ride or Die above pure franchise mechanics into something that actually has something to say. Captain Howard is dead. He has been since the third film. He cannot advocate for himself, cannot produce his own evidence, cannot defend his own reputation. He exists now only in what other people remember about him and what other people are willing to do on his behalf. And the people who built their careers and their safety on corrupting what he stood for are counting on the calculation that most people won't risk much for a dead man's name. Mike and Marcus invalidate that calculation completely. They don't clear Howard's name because it's tactically useful. They don't do it because it will help their own case, though it will. They do it because he was theirs, and defaming him is a wrong that cannot stand, regardless of whether he's alive to know it's been righted. That's a specific and meaningful moral position, the belief that what you owe people doesn't expire when they do. This theme resonates differently depending on how old you are when you watch it. For younger viewers, it's a statement about integrity and loyalty as principles. For viewers who have lost people, who know what it feels like to watch someone's memory be mishandled, to see a person reduced to someone else's convenient narrative after they're gone, it lands as something more personal and more urgent. The protection of the dead from those who would use them is not a small thing. The film treats it as a sacred obligation, and that treatment feels earned rather than sentimental. The coma vision amplifies this theme beautifully. Marcus doesn't just dream of Howard, he has a conversation with him. Howard, characteristically, is not transformed by death into something ethereal and wise. He's still Howard, direct, slightly cranky, fond in a way he'd never admit directly. And what he communicates to Marcus, underneath the specific words, is continuation. The things that mattered between them, the specific texture of their relationship, the qualities Howard saw in Marcus that Marcus didn't fully see in himself, those don't stop being real just because Howard has stopped being alive. Death ended the man. It didn't end what the man built. Mortality and what you do with it. Marcus's character arc is doing something philosophically interesting that the comedy of it can obscure if you're not paying close attention. The experience of facing death, genuinely, physically, in a hospital bed, and returning from it changed is not unusual. People who have near-death experiences often report a reorganization of priorities, a shift in what feels important, a loss of the petty anxieties that structured daily life before the event. What Marcus's arc dramatizes is a specific version of this. The man who is most defined by his fear of mortality becomes, through direct confrontation with it, the man least afraid of anything. There's a philosophical tradition, going back to the Stoics, threading through Montaigne and Heidegger and eventually landing in various forms of contemporary psychology, that argue the examined relationship with death is the foundation of authentic living. The idea being, when you know clearly that you will die, when you stop hiding from that knowledge, you're free to engage with life on its actual terms rather than the terms of ongoing avoidance. Marcus doesn't know this tradition. He doesn't articulate his experience in those terms. But what he's living out, in the middle of a franchise action comedy, is a genuinely ancient human insight about what it means to really stop being afraid. The comedy of his fearlessness works partly because of this philosophical depth. It's funny that Marcus is now the one walking into gunfights with a smile. But it's funny in the way that things are funny when they're also true, when the laugh comes with a recognition that the person doing the ridiculous thing is in some meaningful way more correct than the people watching him do it. Marcus's certainty is absurd. It's also, the film quietly suggests, not entirely wrong. Mike's panic attacks sit on the opposite side of this equation and illuminate it by contrast. Mike has always been the fearless one, but his fearlessness was never examined. It was performed, maintained, a posture that never got tested by genuine mortality because Mike never let himself sit still long enough for mortality to find him. The panic attacks are what happens when the avoidance stops working, when the body, which has been processing fear as adrenaline for 25 years, starts processing it as paralysis instead. What Mike and Marcus are both experiencing, from opposite directions, is the same reckoning. The question of how to live when you know you can die. Marcus has an answer. Mike is still working on his. And that asymmetry, that one partner has found the thing the other one is still looking for, is a quiet, ongoing emotional current underneath everything else. Brotherhood versus institution. The institutional betrayal at the film's center is thematically pointed in a way that goes beyond genre necessity. Bad guys hiding in good institutions is not a new idea. Corrupt officials are a genre staple, but Ride or Die treats the corruption with a specificity that makes it feel like something more than a convenient antagonist structure. The film is genuinely interested in the question of what you do when the thing you have given your life to turns out to be something other than what it said it was. Mike and Marcus have been cops for 25 years. They've bent rules, broken protocols, caused significant property damage across 4 films, and operated with a level of institutional independence that would get most officers removed from the force. But the framework of the badge, the idea that they are ultimately serving something legitimate, that the system's imperfections don't invalidate its purpose, has always been the foundation beneath the chaos. They are bad boys in a good cause. The institution's authority, however loosely interpreted, is what gives their actions meaning. When the institution frames one of their own and turns on them, that foundation is pulled. And what the film explores in the aftermath is how 2 men who have organized their entire professional identities around institutional service find new ground to stand on when the institution goes away. The answer is in nihilism. The film isn't making an argument that institutions are inherently corrupt or that the work of policing is inherently illegitimate. The answer is more specific and more human. When the system fails, what remains is the personal, the specific, irreducible bonds between specific people. Howard matters not because of what his badge represented, but because of what he was to the people who knew him. Marcus and Mike matter to each other, not because they're colleagues, but because they've chosen each other over and over across decades of circumstances that would have reasonably justified walking away. Brotherhood survives the institution's failure because it was never dependent on the institution in the first place. That's the film's central argument, and it's made not in a speech or a monologue, but in the accumulated evidence of every choice Mike and Marcus make from the moment they go fugitive. Every choice they make says, this person is my primary loyalty, not the department, not the badge, not the official narrative, each other. Legacy and what survives. There's a recurring concern across the film's thematic landscape that can be named simply as legacy. The question of what you leave behind, what continues after you're gone, whether the things you built and the choices you made add up to something that outlasts you. Howard's legacy is the explicit version of this theme. but it runs through every major character in subtler forms. Mike's fatherhood of Armando is a legacy question. What does he pass on, intentionally or otherwise, to a son who came into his life under terrible circumstances? Marcus's near-death experience is a legacy question in the opposite direction. What would he have left if he'd gone? What does a man want the surviving version of himself to mean to the people who love him? The conspiracy against Howard is a legacy question. Can someone's meaning be retroactively stolen? Can the record that outlasts a person be falsified in ways that falsify the person themselves? The film answers this last question with particular force. Howard's legacy is not ultimately what the paperwork says. It's what Marcus carries from his coma vision, what Mike fights to restore, what the AMMO team risks their careers to protect. Legacy isn't a record. It's what the people who loved you do in your name after you're gone. The paper trail can be falsified. The love can't. This is a warmer, more hopeful position than you might expect from the fourth film in a franchise built around explosions, and the fact that it arrives with genuine conviction, not as a message stapled on top of the action, but as the natural conclusion of the story being told, is the measure of how seriously Ride or Die takes its own emotional ambitions. The title, Earn, Ride or Die. By the time you've watched Mike stand over Marcus after shooting him, knowing it was right, knowing it was wrong, carrying both things simultaneously, the phrase has been completely transformed from a cool-sounding title into a lived-in, specific, costly reality. To ride or die with someone isn't just to be there in the fun moments or even the difficult ones. It's to make choices for and about them that they might not make for themselves. It's to bear the weight of those choices. It's to sit with the consequence when the choice causes harm, even when the harm was the only available path to something necessary. It's also, the film ultimately suggests, to come back from that, to be angry, legitimately, fully angry, and still be there, to have your best friend shoot you and, after the anger has run its course, to understand that the shooting came from the same place as everything else, 30 years of choosing you first, even when choosing you is complicated and painful and imperfect. That's what the title is actually about. Not the action, not the cool. The specific cost of unconditional loyalty and the specific gift of it, and the way those two things are inseparable from each other. Marcus and Mike have been writing together since before most of the audience watching this film was old enough to have had a friendship that tested them. 30 years of television and movies and cultural references have made their partnership feel like furniture. Familiar, always there, taken for granted. What Ride or Die does, quietly and with genuine sincerity, is remind you that what they have was built, deliberately, repeatedly, at cost, over time. It wasn't given, it was chosen, and they keep choosing it. That's the whole movie, and it's enough. Numbers first because the numbers tell a story. 404-5555184. That's what Bad Boys, Ride or Die made worldwide against a $100 million production budget. $193.5 million of that came from domestic audiences alone. A cinema score of A, meaning the people who actually bought tickets and sat in theaters gave it the highest grade available. And that audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, 97%. In a cultural moment when franchises are regularly eulogized, when the theatrical experience is constantly declared dying, when sequels are supposed to face diminishing returns, the fourth Bad Boys film made $400 million and earned near-universal love from the people who watched it. That is not an accident. That is an audience telling you something specific. The critic-audience gap is data. The 65% critic score sitting underneath that 97% audience score is one of the more interesting data points the film generated, and it's worth reading correctly rather than using it as ammunition in the tired critics versus real people debate that nobody wins. Critics weren't wrong about what Ride or Die isn't. It isn't a formally innovative film. It isn't reinventing its genre or pushing the medium in new directions or making arguments about cinema that require serious critical engagement on those terms. The screenplay has moments of genuine craft and moments that are purely functional. The plot's conspiracy mechanics are efficient rather than elegant. Measured against the standard of what film can be at its most ambitious, 65% is a reasonable accounting of what this specific film is and isn't. But audiences weren't measuring against that standard. They were measuring against a different question entirely. Does this deliver what it promises, with full commitment and genuine heart, for the people it was made for? And on that question, the film scores differently. It knows exactly what it is. It executes what it is without apology or self-conscious. And for the audience that has been invested in Mike and Marcus for anything from a few years to 3 decades, it delivers the specific emotional experience that investment was pointing toward. That gap, not a disagreement about quality, but a gap between two different questions being asked of the same film, is actually a useful template for thinking about franchise cinema more broadly. The best franchise films don't try to be all things. They try to be the right thing for the right audience, and they do it completely. Ride or Die understood its audience better than most of its contemporaries understood theirs. The Will Smith question. Answer History will record this film as Will Smith's return to major theatrical releases after a period of genuine professional uncertainty. And however you feel about the events that created that uncertainty, and people feel various things, legitimately, the film's commercial and audience performance is a clear data point about where things landed. Audiences came. They came in significant numbers, and they scored the film at 97%. And the numbers suggest that the people who wanted to see Will Smith play Mike Lowrey on a big screen in a movie that was exactly what they hoped it would be. Those people showed up and got what they came for. That's not a moral verdict on anything that happened before the film. It's a specific audience statement about what they were willing to show up for and why. What's interesting cinematically, separate from the off-screen context, is how Smith himself responded to the moment. There's no performance anxiety visible in Ride or Die. There's no quality of an actor trying to prove something, or reclaim something, or manage his image through the role. He plays Mike Lowrey the way he has always played Mike Lowrey, with total fluency, total comfort in the character's skin, and the specific chemistry with Martin Lawrence that hasn't dimmed across all these years. Whatever he was carrying going into production, he left it outside the frame. The work speaks for itself. What it means for the franchise. Where does the Bad Boys franchise go from here? The short answer is somewhere. The longer answer is more interesting. Ride or Die deliberately leaves threads open. Armando's situation is unresolved in ways that clearly anticipate a fifth installment. The institutional landscape has been cleaned up, but not transformed. McGrath is gone, but the systems that enabled him are still standing, still imperfect, still capable of being turned. Mike's marriage is new, and the emotional work of building a family, with Christine, with Armando, with the complicated legacy of his own history, is ongoing rather than concluded. What Adil and Bilal have built across their 2 installments is a franchise that can sustain genuine character development without sacrificing the energy that made people love it in the first place. That's rare. Most long-running franchises eventually face a version of this choice: go deeper into character and lose the genre joy, or maintain the genre joy and strand the characters at the level of personality rather than letting them become actual people. Mike and Marcus are actual people now. They have interior lives and ongoing struggles and relationships that have genuinely evolved. And the action sequences are still great. The next film, whenever it comes, in whatever form, will inherit characters who have been through something, who have been betrayed by the institution they served, who have tested the limits of what their partnership can hold, who have reckoned with mortality from both directions and come out the other side changed by it. That's a richer foundation than the franchise has ever had before. The closing thought. Here's the image the film leaves you with, underneath all the spectacle and the plot and the very impressive helicopter crash. 2 men standing. Both of them older than they were when this started. Both of them carrying more than they were carrying. More history, more grief, more love, more complexity. The city behind them doing what it always does, blazing, loud, indifferent to whatever just happened, and already moving on to whatever comes next. And between these 2 men, in the space between them, no words required, no explanation offered, something that has no official name. Not a partnership exactly, though it is that. Not a friendship exactly, though it is that too. Something more specific and more durable. The particular bond that forms between 2 people who have consistently chosen each other when the easier choice was available and kept choosing each other and will keep choosing each other, and know without discussing it that this is simply the organizing fact of their lives. Marcus Burnett nearly died on a dance floor at his best friend's wedding and came back certain of things he was never certain of before. And Mike Lowrey got married, had a panic attack, went fugitive, shot his best friend, and is working on being a father to a son he didn't know he had. And neither of them, in any version of the future the film imagines, is doing any of it alone. That's what 30 years of a franchise at its best can do. It can take 2 characters who started as a genre premise, the mismatched partners, the style and sense duo, the buddy cop template, and turn them, through the accumulated weight of time and attention and genuine investment, into something that actually resembles the best version of what human loyalty looks like. Imperfect, costly, occasionally involving one of them shooting the other, and completely, irreversibly real. The wedding already happened. The ride isn't over. It never really is.